Yeah, I'm going to talk about something called GEOBON, a global biodiversity observation network. I'm on the steering committee for GEOBON and also co-lead with Tet Yahara, one of the working groups on genetics and phylogenetics. I should point out that Tet is the genomics person. I'm more or less the broad biodiversity researcher, what I call the gardenomics person. And I'm pleased to be here because particularly the theme of this meeting I think is an interesting one for GEOBON people, this idea of genomics-enabled place-based research. And I'm going to suggest that that theme raises some really nice opportunities for co-benefits and cooperation between GEOBON and genomics observatories. Well, what is this group on Earth observations? That's a really interesting sort of group that came together in about, I think, 2005. It's a voluntary partnership, if you like, of about 90 countries now, and nearly as many other institutions, including non-government organizations and so on, IUCN, GBIF, and so on. And I think that element of involvement is really important in terms of our potential partnership with genomics observatories. So one thing that this group does is it effectively runs something called the Global Earth Observation System of Systems. And what that system of systems word means is that it's not reinventing the wheel, it's effectively trying to, again, network, or if you like, even network networks. And if you read that little kind of goal statement there, it's ultimately about management and decision making, but the key there in red is that it's achieving that through coordinated, comprehensive, and sustained Earth observations and information. And that, as we'll see, covers a whole broad spectrum, including remote sensing and biodiversity elements and so on. So this gives a little schematic of what we're trying to do there. The GEOS framework, in fact, covers what they like to call 9 society benefit areas, and biodiversity then is just one of those 9 biodiversity, one of those, if you like, social benefit areas. Each of those, in theory, will have its own observation network. GEOBON only started a few years ago, 2009, but has become a bit of a guiding light in terms of how to begin this process. So GEOBON's little bit of history here is, we had, I think, a preliminary meeting in 2008. This is all very recent and still just beginning. In 2009, created the science committee and so on. And one of the important first steps that was taken was pulling people together, looking for new members, creating some working groups that are very much changing, evolving kinds of entities. And as you see from that list, which was originally 8, and now we have a 9th working group, which is basically the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership. We've divided things up very much in a workmanlike fashion, so you partly have different biomes represented on these working groups. You have different levels of biodiversity. And then also we have data standards and so on with GBIF people involved, and already an involvement with the genomics community. And then also that second to last working group there very much has to do with kind of the integrative challenge. Because one thing we don't want is 8 or 9 working groups going off and doing their own thing, but we want them to come together. And I highlight that as one of the issues now. We meet again as a whole group of working groups in November, and one of the big challenges I think will be trying to pull all this together. We have, I think, a barrier in the sense that we have good bits and pieces of funding, but really we need some funding to come together in terms of the big picture, and that's one of the challenges. So one strategy we're taking in order to kind of find the glue and sort of the early products that can help us pull these different working groups together is something we're calling essential biodiversity variables, or EBVs. The idea here, and I think this is very relevant to genomics observatories, the basic idea here is some core fundamental set of variables that are the basis for a global, so essentially global rather than just regional, a global coordinated program that looks at how global biodiversity is changing. So if we have some motivating kind of a hypothesis or goal, it really is this notion of biodiversity change across all levels and biomes. And then the second paragraph here is very relevant because the approach primarily that EBVs will promote will be the idea of repeatedly measured, these variables will be repeatedly measured, particularly at the same locations or over the same areas more broadly, and at intervals defined basically by the particular kinds of modes of variability of those variables. And this is interesting because GEOBON has had a real debate about what its best approach is, and is really kind of taking a combined approach. On the one hand, looking at long-term monitoring sites, and there's a heavy emphasis on that, okay? This is my second to last slide. And on the other hand, doing models where, in fact, bits and pieces of information come together in global models. So to finish with my last slide, I want to highlight 4 or 5 areas, and in a way these are areas for discussion in terms of potential co-benefits between GEOs and GEOBON. And one of these is this development of essential biodiversity variables. We're looking very much at the sorts of variables right now that the Convention on Biological Diversity needs, and oftentimes that's crop plants and genetic diversity. We really need the genomics. And so the open question is, what are the essential biodiversity variables that would fit in to GEO's strategies? We have the idea then of GEOBON observatories already defined to some extent through ILTER and others at the species and ecosystems levels. We really have a gap in terms of pulling that in under the umbrella for genomics. And just a few other points there then about clearly a co-benefit relates to this theme that we've heard a lot about at this meeting relating to contextual information. And I think that's probably the main advantage we might have in having genomics observatories as part of GEOBON, because in effect we have an integration of that fundamental information. So a few other points there, but I think instead of running over time, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.